Have you ever finished a Golden Age classic and felt like the story was whispering a secret meant only for you? For more than 3 decades, from 1934 to the mid-1960s, filmmakers were forbidden to show anything the production code censors classified as sex perversion, Hollywood's catch-all for homosexuality. Violations meant denied distribution, crippling fines, or costly reshoots. Tonight we'll examine 20 Hollywood productions released between 1935 and 1963, whose secret gay subtexts survive the censors and still crackle on screen. Ready? Let's flick off the house lights and let history project itself. Bride of Frankenstein, 1935. Lightning didn't only animate the monster in James Whale's sequel, it jolted open a closet door the production code tried to nail shut. Openly gay in private life, Whale doubled the first film's rumination on outsiders by giving bridemaker Dr. Pretorius a camp theatricality that practically shouts from the screen. Ernest Thesiger's performance drips with coded mannerisms, from his pursed lips to his theatrical gestures, that signaled unmistakably to those who understood. The studio ledger put the budget at $397,000, and the worldwide take near $2 million. A 5-to-1 return that proved transgression could be lucrative. What made this possible was Whale's visual genius. He composed scenes where the monster literally peers through lace curtains at bridal beds and lingered on Pretorius's fastidious attention to detail in his macabre laboratory. Critics of 1935 wrote about exquisite perversity without daring to specify why. Modern scholars note that Pretorius calls the monster his new friend, a term contemporary audiences understood as code, and that Whale frames their toast to a new world of gods and monsters, like a clandestine wedding. Queer horror historian Shannon Scott counts at least 9 moments where Pretorius's body language telegraphs attraction, from the caress of a cigar to a bedroom tete-a-tete, lit like a valentine. The film's iconic scene where the monster encounters a blind hermit has been read as a parable of queer recognition. Two outcasts finding momentary connection in a world that reveals them. Whale's camera dwells on their hands touching, their faces in close proximity, creating an intimacy that transcends verbal communication. When the monster cries at the sound of violin music, we're witnessing not just pathos, but the queer experience of beauty in exile. The Maltese Falcon, 1941. San Francisco sleaze never sounded silkier than when Peter Lorre purrs, "You, sir, are a man of nice judgment." The Breen office deleted the word fairy from Dashiell Hammett's novel, but actor Lorre swathed Joel Cairo in lavender water cologne and gardenia cravats, while director John Huston shot him stroking his cane with unmistakable innuendo. The character's entrance is a masterclass in coded presentation. Cairo sends his card to Spade, who sniffs it and remarks on its perfumed scent before the man himself appears, dapper and precise. Warner Brothers gambled $375,000 on this adaptation. The film earned more than 7 times that amount and became the first noir nominated for Best Picture. The film's financial success demonstrated how coded representation could fly under censors' radar while remaining legible to audiences in the know. Bogart's Sam Spade banters about gunsel, underworld slang for a young male lover, knowing only a fraction of the audience would catch it. Hammett had used the code in print. Huston slipped it past censors by insisting it merely meant gunslinger. The term applies to Wilmer Cook, played by Elisha Cook Jr., whose relationship with Sidney Greenstreet's Gutman carries distinctly paternal yet possessive overtones. Cairo's passport lists him from some little off-brand of Bulgaria, a sneer at Europe's supposed depravity, yet the character's poise makes him one of the era's few queer figures with agency. His fastidious manner, the handkerchief, the gloves, the careful speech, constructs a character whose sexuality is simultaneously hidden and displayed. The Falcon's allure, like queer life itself, lies in what can't be openly named, but is unmistakably present. The final scene, where Cairo and Wilmer are led away together, suggests a community of outsiders forming even within the criminal underworld. The Picture of Dorian Gray, 1945. A portrait that ages in the attic while its owner chases forbidden thrills. Oscar Wilde's metaphor was already notorious when MGM adapted it. The studio spent a lavish $1.9 million, adding 4 Technicolor inserts to an otherwise monochrome film, so Dorian's sins would literally burst into color. The investment paid off with almost $3 million in receipts and an Oscar for art direction that snuck carnal decadence onto America's wartime screens. Wilde's novel had long been read as a meditation on forbidden desire, and director Albert Lewin preserved this subtext through careful visual coding. When Dorian first sees his portrait, the camera lingers on his rapturous face in a manner suggesting self-desire, narcissism with homosexual overtones. The portrait itself, painted by artist Ivan Le Lorraine Albright, transforms from ethereal beauty to corrupted flesh, visualizing the era's view of deviant sexuality as physical corruption. Lewin softened the word homosexual into velvet dinner party banter, yet George Sanders's Lord Henry seduces Dorian with lines lifted intact from Wilde's trials. "The only way to get rid of temptation is to yield to it," he purrs, initiating Dorian into a world of sensual exploration that the film suggests without explicitly showing. Cinematographers lit Dorian's face in butterfly shadows, an on-screen equivalent of a half-open closet door, while artist Basil Hallward's infatuation with Dorian survives almost uncut from Wilde's text. Modern queer theorists argue that the supernatural portrait externalizes shame familiar to 1940s gay audiences threatened by psychiatric cures. The painting functions as Dorian's queer double, bearing the marks of pleasure that society deems sinful. Gray's doomed hedonism mirrored their fear. Pleasure today meant disfigurement tomorrow, a perfect metaphor for a community forced to hide its true face. Gilda, 1946. "There never was a woman like Gilda," boasted Columbia's poster. But the triangle binding Johnny Farrell and casino kingpin, Balin Munson, is homoerotic long before Rita Hayworth sachets in. The film's marketing emphasized Hayworth's sexuality, but the narrative's emotional core lies in the charged relationship between the two men. Production reports list domestic rentals of $3.75 million, Columbia's biggest earner of the year, demonstrating that coded desire sold tickets even when audiences couldn't consciously identify what drew them in. Director Charles Vidor's visual storytelling created a love triangle, where the strongest side wasn't between man and woman. Vidor frames Johnny and Balin's first meeting like a pickup. Wet streets, tight close-ups, Balin inviting Johnny home to teach you a lesson. Their relationship contains all the jealousy and possessiveness of romance. Johnny becomes Balin's right-hand man, living in his house and sharing his confidences. When Balin introduces Gilda as his new wife, Johnny's reaction plays more like betrayal than professional disappointment. When Balin disappears, Johnny marries Gilda, but policies her sexuality with the intensity of a jealous lover, not a husband. His obsessive surveillance and emotional cruelty toward her read as displacement, punishing her for taking Balin's affection and then seemingly betraying it. Historian Richard Dyer calls Gilda the queerest heterosexual film ever made, because the ostensibly straight romance works only if Johnny's real obsession is with the absent man. Hayworth's iconic glove strip tease during Put the Blame on Mame distracts the censors, while Johnny's lingering gaze tells another story. He watches her not with desire, but with a complicated mixture of resentment and identification. Both Johnny and Gilda compete for Balin's attention and approval, making her less Johnny's romantic rival than his mirror. Rope, 1948. Two Ivy League thrill-seekers strangle a classmate, serve cocktails over the body, and debate Nietzschean superiority. Alfred Hitchcock's first Technicolor feature used an unbroken take gimmick to trap audiences in a queer cat-and-mouse game. Budgeted between $1.5 and $2 million, it recouped just over break-even, evidence that mainstream viewers sensed but resisted its subtext. The film's technical innovation, shooting in 10-minute continuous takes to create the illusion of real-time action, serves a deeper purpose. The unblinking camera forces viewers to remain in uncomfortable proximity to Brandon and Philip, creating a claustrophobic intimacy that mirrors their secret relationship. The real-life Leopold and Loeb were lovers. Playwright Patrick Hamilton kept the implication, and Hitchcock retained Hamilton's text almost verbatim, instructing Granger and Dahl to act like they'd known each other intimately. Their performances are filled with telling gestures, shared glances, physical proximity, and moments of unspoken communication that suggest a history deeper than friendship. The camera often positions Brandon behind Philip, hands on shoulders, filling the frame with possessive intimacy that communicates their relationship without explicit declaration. Their apartment, with its panoramic window and carefully arranged furniture, becomes an extension of their shared aesthetic, a domestic space that speaks to cohabitation beyond mere roommates. When James Stewart's professor, Rupert Cadell, finally realizes what binds the killers, his disgust feels directed as much at their sexuality as their crime. His final speech condemning their superior intellect philosophy carries undertones of condemning their entire way of life. Rope thus indicates a homophobic society while pretending to side with it, a masterclass in doublespeak that allows viewers to simultaneously condemn and voyeuristically participate in the transgression. Red River, 1948. A cattle drive. Western hardly seems queer territory until Montgomery Clift and John Ireland start comparing pistols in what critic Vito Russo dubbed the most erotic gun-measuring scene in American cinema. Howard Hawks' frontier epic cost $2.7 million and earned more than $4.5 million in rentals, cementing Clift's star debut while smuggling homoerotic tension into America's most traditionally masculine genre. The scene plays out with remarkable boldness. Cherry Valance approaches Matt Garth and asks to see his gun. "That's a good-looking gun," he observes, before suggesting, "Mind if I see it?" After they exchange weapons and admire each other's feel, Cherry delivers the suggestive line, "There are only two things more beautiful than a good gun, a Swiss watch or a woman from anywhere." Yet the scene's focus remains entirely on the men and their weapons. The script alters Borden Chase's novel, so Clift's Matt never courts a woman until the final reel. Instead, he bonds with gunman Cherry over who can draw faster, their dialogue thick with innuendo about skill and prowess. Hawks further dresses Matt in soft buckskin and kerchiefs that contrast with John Wayne's rough denim, visually echoing a butch femme pairing that would have been recognizable to queer viewers of the era. During campfire scenes, Hawks lights the men by the same flame, a cinematographic intimacy that 1948 critics labeled peculiar warmth. The cattle drive itself becomes a space where traditional masculine labor creates opportunities for homosocial bonding outside society's normal constraints. When Cherry takes a bullet meant for Matt, his death scene plays out like romantic sacrifice. All About Eve, 1950. Broadway backstabbing, biting dialogue, and lesbian panic. 20th Century Fox sank $1.4 million into Joseph L. Mankiewicz's acerbic script and reaped $8.4 million worldwide, plus a record 14 Oscar nominations. The film's central premise, ambitious understudy Eve Harrington infiltrating the life of theater diva Margot Channing, carries unmistakable undertones of same-sex desire cloaked as professional ambition. Eve's fixation on aging diva Margot starts as hero worship, but escalates to late-night bedroom visits and a stolen dress. Actions that blur the line between admiration and desire. The scene where Eve tries on Margot's robe in her dressing room, preening before a mirror, reads as both identification and attraction, wanting to both be and possess the object of fascination. Critic Daniel Lavery notes that Eve never expresses sexual interest in men until survival requires it. Theater critic Addison DeWitt blackmails her by naming the attraction the film can't. "You're an improbable person, Eve." His recognition of her improbability suggests awareness of her queerness, which he uses as leverage to control her career. In 1950, gossip columns, star Bette Davis quipped that she played Margot as if she sensed a schoolgirl crush. A wink audiences understood. Davis's performance includes moments of genuine tenderness toward Eve, suggesting Margot recognizes something of herself in the younger woman, perhaps her own buried desires. The film's enduring sting comes from Margot realizing the threat isn't youth. It's a forbidden desire that she herself might share. Her famous line, "Fasten your seatbelts, it's going to be a bumpy night," carries the weight of self-recognition. The final scene, where another young woman appears poised to become Eve's understudy, suggests a cycle of repressed desire and identification continuing endlessly in a world where it cannot be named. Strangers on a Train, 1951. Bruno Antony orders a double bourbon, clasps Guy Haynes's hand just a hair too long, and pitches a murder swap that sounds uncannily like a seduction. "I'll do your murder, you do mine," he proposes, a criminal partnership that reads as a romantic proposition. Hitchcock shot Guy's tennis match with the camera fixed on Bruno's longing stare, isolating him from the crowd like a spurned lover. Production cost $1.2 million. Box office drew nearly $7 million, proof that suspense mixed with subtext could still rake in profits while giving queer audiences rare representation. Bruno's persistent pursuit of Guy, following him across town, showing up at his home, inserting himself into Guy's social circle, mimics romantic obsession more than criminal partnership. Patricia Highsmith's novel was blunt about same-sex desire, but screenwriter Raymond Chandler muted it. Then, Hitchcock put it back photographically. Note the shot of Bruno fondling Guy's lighter between his lips, or the monogram tie clasp he gifts, a stand-in for jewelry. These visual moments create an unmistakable current of desire that bypasses censors focused on dialogue and plot. The censors cut a sweet dream phone line, yet allowed Bruno's mother to say her son never had an impulse he didn't act on, a damning double entendre that hints at sexual nonconformity. Bruno's elaborate dress and affected mannerisms, his silk ties and precise gestures, mark him as queer-coded in the visual language of 1950s cinema. By film's end, the lovers are locked in deadly embrace on a carousel, the only consummation the code would allow. Their fight to the death becomes a substitute for the physical relationship they cannot have. When Bruno dies, still clutching Guy's lighter, the token of their connection, it functions as both plot resolution and tragic romantic finale. The queer character punished as the code demanded, but granted a moment of symbolic union. The Hitchhiker, 1953. Ida Lupino became the first woman to direct a film noir, and she laced it with a critique of macho bravado that borders on homoerotic commentary. Shot for just $160,000, yet praised by the Library of Congress for cultural significance, the picture strands two fishermen with a sadistic drifter whose gaze lingers on their sleeping bodies, with a mixture of threat and desire. Lupino's innovation was turning the confined space of a car into an arena of psychological domination with sexual undertones. Killer Emmett Myers forces Roy Collins and Gilbert Bowen into increasingly intimate situations, sharing cramped quarters, watching each other's vulnerabilities, and ultimately stripping to change attire under his watchful eye. Psychologists consulted by Lupino suggested that serial killer Billy Cook was motivated by sexual dominance. Lupino translated that into visual cues. A single broken eye on the killer's face that watches, even when closed, creating a perpetual voyeuristic presence that turns the men into objects of surveillance. The camera emphasizes the killer's repeated gun caresses, mirroring masturbation, transforming his weapon into a phallic extension of control. When the drifter forces the men to undress to change a tire, brief cuts to their belts sliding out of loops slipped past censors by claiming authentic detail, but the scene's tension derives from exposed vulnerability under the killer's gaze. The power dynamic between the three men becomes increasingly charged as they move deeper into the Mexican desert, away from social constraints. Viewers attuned to subtext read a predator hunting not cash, but closeted fear. Myers terrorizes the men partly by forcing them into physical and emotional intimacy they would normally avoid. Their eventual triumph comes through collaboration and mutual support, suggesting a positive homosocial bond that contrasts with Myers's twisted dominance. Lupino's direction creates a noir that questions masculine stoicism, while acknowledging the undercurrents of desire that flow beneath it. Rebel Without a Cause, 1955. School shootings, knife fights, and convertible races made headlines. But what made Nicholas Ray's teen drama revolutionary was the shy smile Sal Mineo's Plato reserves for James Dean's Jim Stark. With a $1.5 million budget and $4.5 million in U.S. rentals, the film minted Dean as an icon and introduced Hollywood's first gay teenager, if you knew how to look. Plato's longing for Jim is written into every gesture. The way he carries Jim's photograph, his desperate need for attention, and his almost religious devotion to his new friend. The abandoned mansion scene, where Plato plays house with Jim and Judy, Natalie Wood, positions him as both child-seeking parents and partner-seeking companionship. When he asks, "Can I stay the night?" the layers of meaning are impossible to miss. Plato keeps a pinup of Alan Ladd in his locker, calls Jim his hero, and dies cradled in Jim's arms while wearing Jim's coat, a sartorial consummation that stands in for physical intimacy. Director Nicholas Ray instructed Mineo to play it slightly in love, advice the 16-year-old actor later confirmed in interviews. Mineo's performance is remarkably unguarded for the era, conveying genuine affection that transcends mere friendship. The planetarium finale locks the doomed boy beneath a giant star field, visualizing queer isolation in a universe declaring the end of the world. The cosmic imagery suggests both the vastness of Plato's feelings and his alienation. The stars he gazes at with Jim are beautiful but distant, like the connection he craves. The censors allowed the relationship because it remains unspoken. The audience feels the tragedy precisely because it can't be named. When Jim zips his red jacket onto Plato's body after his death, the gesture reads as both protection and claiming, a final acknowledgement of a bond society wouldn't permit them to express in life. Tea and Sympathy, 1956. Censors forbade MGM from even hinting that prep school outcast Tom Lee might be gay, yet every classmate taunts him with that slur. The film's title became a euphemism for homosexuality in 1950s slang. Box office exceeded $3.4 million, showing middle America would pay to watch the taboo it publicly rejected. The film presents Tom's difference through carefully coded visual cues. His preference for folk music over sports, his theatrical interests, his sensitivity to beauty, and his physical awkwardness among aggressive peers. The script carefully avoids direct statements while making the subtext unmistakable through the cruel nickname, Sister Boy, and constant references to Tom not being a regular fellow. Director Vincente Minnelli, himself bisexual, softened Robert Anderson's stage ending, but kept Tom's preference for music over sports, and his archery club scene, where another boy strokes Tom's arm under the excuse of correcting posture. The homosocial boarding school setting allowed exploration of masculine anxiety and budding sexuality under the guise of coming-of-age drama. Deborah Kerr's Laura offers him tea and sympathy, a Victorian phrase for female consolation that reads as surrogate same-sex affection. Her decision to make a man of Tom by sleeping with him represents the film's problematic solution, heterosexuality as cure. Yet Minnelli's direction suggests the futility of this gesture. The flash-forward ending shows Tom happily married, but the film's emotional impact relies on viewers understanding this as conformity rather than transformation. The climactic line, "Years from now, when you talk about this, and you will be kind," becomes Minnelli's appeal to future audiences forced to gossip in code. It acknowledges that Tom's story will be told and retold as rumor and secret, while asking for compassion rather than judgment. Minnelli transforms a potentially homophobic narrative into a plea for understanding, working within the constraints of the code to deliver a radical message of acceptance. Edge of the City, 1957. Martin Ritt's dockside drama is best remembered for tackling racism, but its other radical gesture is the friendship between black stevedore Tommy Tyler and drifter Axel Nordman, a bond the camera frames with the tenderness denied to their female partners. The film cost just under $500,000 and barely broke even, yet critics praised its raw compassion. Ritt uses shower room sequences, unheard of outside war pictures, to linger on male backs and shoulders, creating a visual intimacy between the men that's notably absent from scenes with their romantic partners. These moments of physical vulnerability contrast with the hyper-masculine dock setting, suggesting a deeper connection forming beyond workplace camaraderie. Tommy and Axel's friendship develops through shared meals, confidences, and physical ease with one another. Tommy teaches Axel to dance, puts an arm around his shoulders, and invites him home. When Tommy's wife Ellen jokes that Axel should move in with them, the proposal is delivered with knowing laughter that acknowledges the depth of the men's connection. Queer film scholar Michael Rogan argues that Ritt builds a triangle whose only functional side is male-male, pushing heteronormative romances off-screen or rendering them secondary to the central relationship. The film spends far more time developing the bond between the men than their relationships with women, creating an emotional core that resonates beyond buddy movie conventions. When racist foreman Charles Malick snarls that Axel is fishy, the slur doubles as a 1950s term for effeminate men, suggesting Malick's hatred stems from multiple prejudices. Axel's eventual stand against Malik reads like queer allyship encoded in hard-hat grit. He defends not just his friend, but their right to a connection that defies conventional boundaries. Tommy's death forces Axel to stand on his own, completing a character arc that's as much about accepting his authentic self as seeking justice. Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, 1958. Tennessee Williams fought the Breen office for years and lost. MGM deleted every explicit reference to Brick's love for teammate Skipper. Yet Paul Newman acts the void. His Brick drinks, limps, and recoils from wife Maggie's touch, with a despair audiences sense as more than grief. The studio pumped $2.3 million into production and reaped $11.2 million, its biggest hit of 58, proving that even sanitized queer subtext could draw audiences. The film's power comes from what remains unsaid. Newman's performance conveys volumes through silence, physical distance, and occasional explosive outbursts when others approach the truth. His Brick exists in deliberate isolation, using alcohol to create both physical and emotional barriers between himself and others, particularly Maggie, whose desire he cannot reciprocate. Newman later said he played Brick as a man fighting internalized homophobia, and director Richard Brooks frames mirrors to catch Brick staring at his own torso, as if searching for evidence of the desire he cannot acknowledge. These reflective surfaces create visual doubling that suggests Brick's split identity, the public figure versus private truth. Williams's stage line, "One great true thing, love between two men," survives only as a look exchange between Brick and Big Daddy during their basement confrontation. The camera penetrates where dialogue cannot. That crucial scene, where Big Daddy pushes Brick to confront the disgust that drives his drinking, becomes an elaborate dance around the unspeakable, with euphemisms like friendship carrying the weight of deeper emotion. Modern essays on homosexual erasure show how absence becomes presence, a paradox that still haunts viewers who feel what Brick dares not speak. When he finally breaks his crutch, the symbolic phallus that has both supported and distanced him, Brick moves toward reconciliation with Maggie, not through desire, but through resignation, accepting the mendacity against which he has struggled throughout the film. Suddenly, last summer, 1959. Beach cannibalism and lobotomy might sound extreme, but they masked the more shocking word homosexual that both playwright Williams and screenwriter Gore Vidal knew would never pass the code. Columbia's gamble paid $9 million worldwide on a modest budget, powered by Elizabeth Taylor's Oscar-nominated hysteria and the film's sensationalist marketing that promised to reveal the unspeakable thing that happened one summer. The plot revolves around Sebastian Venable, a gay poet devoured, literally, by beach boys he tried to exploit. Because the code forbade showing him alive, he became an absence puncturing every scene, known only through the conflicting narratives of his mother Violet and cousin Catherine. This narrative structure brilliantly mirrors the social erasure of homosexuality. Sebastian exists only through others' accounts, never permitted to speak for himself. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz lights Catherine's flashbacks with surreal heat haze, turning sun-bleached flesh into nightmare desire. The famous beach scene, where half-naked young men pursue Sebastian up a hill, transforms gay panic into literal horror, their hunger both sexual and cannibalistic. Sebastian's white suit and Panama hat, seen only from behind, create an image of pristine refinement destroyed by primal desire. Psychoanalysis scenes debate unnatural love without ever saying the name. An evasion so obvious, 1959 critics called it perversely coy. Dr. Kukrowicz functions as audience surrogate, piecing together the truth that Violet wishes to destroy through lobotomizing Catherine. The psychiatric framing allows discussion of forbidden topics under the guise of medical inquiry. The film's monstrosity, like its queer heart, lies in what silence forces people to imagine. When Catherine finally remembers the truth, her catharsis comes through speaking the unspeakable, a narrative breakthrough that parallels the social need to acknowledge queer existence. Sebastian's death, while conforming to the code's demand for punishment, ultimately serves as an indictment of the repression that created his predatory behavior. Compulsion, 1959. Richard Fleischer's retelling of the Leopold Loeb case restores the homosexual motive that Rope suggested but never named. Shot for $1.8 million, Compulsion broke even domestically, yet won Cannes acting prizes for its leads, Bradford Dillman and Dean Stockwell. The film's emotional intensity derives from its relatively forthright portrayal of obsessive attachment between the killers. Fleischer frames the relationship between Judd and Artie as an uneven power dynamic with sexual undertones. Judd's infatuation with Artie manifests as a desperate need for approval and willingness to participate in increasingly dangerous activities to maintain their bond. Stockwell's Dean caresses partner Artie's cheek in a gesture of intimacy that survived the censor's cuts, and the camera lingers on Judd's handcuffed wrists, visual shorthand for forbidden sexuality and submission. The film's most daring scene shows Judd returning Artie's cufflinks, a lover's token, with trembling hands after Artie has betrayed him to the police. The moment plays as romantic disillusionment rather than mere anger at a co-conspirator. Orson Welles' Clarence Darrow stand-in defends them by blaming Nietzsche's philosophy. But Fleischer stages flashbacks where erotic thrill clearly drives the crime, particularly for Artie, who derives visible pleasure from manipulating Judd's devotion. A deleted kissing scene survives in stills. Fox destroyed the negative after the Breen office objected. Even so, contemporary reviewers used phrases like unnatural friendship, proof that audiences still decoded what the law would not print. The trial sequence, where the killers sit side by side, yet emotionally separated, conveys the isolation of their individual reckonings with guilt. Compulsion remains significant for acknowledging, however obliquely, that the killer's relationship was central to their crime, not as pathology, but as twisted expression of a connection society refused to recognize legitimately. When Judd finally rejects Artie's manipulations, his moral awakening comes through recognizing toxic love, not denying love itself. Ben-Hur, 1959. MGM's $15.2 million epic boasted 100,000 costumes and a box office gross near $147 million. But the real risk was Gore Vidal's decision to write Judah Ben-Hur and Roman tribune Messala as spurned lovers. Vidal briefed actor Stephen Boyd on the backstory. Charlton Heston was kept in the dark, so the resentment would glow on screen with authentic emotional charge. The reunion scene between the men vibrates with unacknowledged history. Watch the early courtyard sequence. Messala's eyes sweep Judah's body before he says, "It's as if time stood still." A line delivered by Boyd with unmistakable longing. Director William Wyler allows the camera to linger on their embraces and close proximity, creating physical intimacy that exceeds typical masculine friendship of the era. Their shared cup of wine, a traditional wedding symbol, signals reunion and covenant. Boyd plays Messala's subsequent anger at Judah's political disagreement as lovers' betrayal rather than mere ideological difference. The scene where Messala condemns Judah's family carries the emotional weight of intimate rejection. He strikes not just at his enemy, but at the man who refused his affection. The later chariot duel plays like a lover's quarrel fought with blades and horses, their physical contest substituting for the emotional and sexual confrontation the code would never permit. Messala's dying words to Judah, "The race is not over," suggest an eternal bond transcending even death. The film's Christian redemption narrative provides cover for a story of passion that couldn't be directly told. The code scribes missed it, but queer audiences felt vindicated. When a 2016 remake erased the subtext, critics claimed that the story suddenly lacked motive, proof of how deeply Vidal's forbidden romance had sunk into cultural memory. By playing one character aware and one unaware of their past intimacy, the film created a perfect metaphor for closeted history itself. Spartacus, 1960. The costliest film Universal had yet mounted, Stanley Kubrick's slave revolt saga hid its queerest scene in plain sight. Roman general Marcus Licinius Crassus bathes with servant Antoninus and muses, "Do you consider eating oysters morale? And snails?" Screenwriter Dalton Trumbo's metaphor for bisexuality made it to theaters only in 1991. The original release carried a censored dub that eliminated the sexual implication. The scene's brilliance lies in its philosophical framing. Crassus debates taste and morality using food as metaphor, while the visual composition, unmistakable erotic tension. Olivier plays Crassus's hunger as erotic menace, stroking Antoninus's shoulder before asking the seafood question that signals his omnivorous sexual appetite. When Antoninus flees after this encounter, his escape reads as rejection of sexual subjugation rather than mere desire for freedom. His later bond with Spartacus forms a contrast, brotherhood versus exploitation, that gives personal dimension to the political struggle. The scene's restoration revealed Kubrick's genius for layering politics and sexuality. Revolution isn't merely class war, but the right to love freely. Crassus represents not just political oppression, but sexual dominance that claims ownership of bodies and desires. His eventual defeat symbolizes liberation from multiple forms of control. The film grossed $60 million, and President-elect Kennedy crossed picket lines to see it, signaling the Red Scare and Lavender Scare were losing power. The oysters and snails scene remains one of cinema's most sophisticated discussions of sexual preference, using ancient Rome's different moral framework to comment on contemporary American prudery. When Antoninus performs as both singer and fighter, he represents integration of traditionally feminine and masculine traits, a wholeness the rigid Roman hierarchy cannot tolerate. The Children's Hour, 1961. William Wyler remade his own 1936 These Three, after the code relaxed just enough to let the word lesbian hover. Never spoken, yet unavoidable. Budgeted at $3.6 million, the film barely recouped costs, suggesting audiences still flinched at even implied homosexuality when not disguised as exotic history or crime narrative. The story follows schoolteachers Karen Wright and Martha Doby, whose lives collapse when a vindictive student accuses them of having an unnatural relationship. Unlike the earlier adaptation, which transformed the accusation into a heterosexual love triangle, this version confronts the original premise. What happens when two women are accused of loving each other? Wyler frames their single shared bedroom in soft chiaroscuro, creating domestic intimacy that takes on sinister implications once accusations begin. The women's closeness, their inside jokes, their shared business, their comfortable physicality, becomes evidence against them in a witch hunt that reveals society's preoccupation with policing female bonds. The film's most powerful scene comes when Martha finally confronts her own feelings. The whispered confession, "I have loved you the way they said," erupts from McClane with raw terror, the character simultaneously discovering and recoiling from her truth. Her subsequent suicide represents both the code's demand for punishment and a devastating comment on the impossibility of living truthfully in a hostile society. Censors insisted Martha die to punish the perceived sin, a demand Wyler obeyed but shot in silhouette to soften its moral judgment. Karen's final walk away from Martha's funeral suggests both rejection of societal condemnation and inability to remain in a space of such painful recognition. The tragedy isn't Martha's sexuality, the film implies, but a society that names love obscenely. Wyler's direction questions the very moral framework that forced him to end the film with death rather than acceptance. Advise and Consent, 1962. Otto Preminger turned a Capitol Hill thriller into Hollywood's first mainstream portrait of a closeted politician. Don Murray's Senator Brigham Anderson hides an Army-era affair. Blackmail drives him to a fatal razor in his Senate office. The scene left censors aghast, but uncut. Trade papers guessed the budget at under $4 million, moderate for an ensemble epic that broke multiple taboos. The film's political intrigue centers on a controversial Secretary of State confirmation, but its emotional core is Anderson's desperate attempt to keep his past hidden. Preminger creates parallels between political and personal integrity, suggesting that the system that demands public heterosexuality creates the very secrecy it then condemns as security risk. Preminger shot exterior gay bar footage on New York's St. Mark's Place, the first time an American studio film photographed a real queer space rather than a fabricated set. The scene lasts 1 minute, yet it broke a visual taboo by acknowledging the existence of gay gathering places. The dimly lit bar interior, with its piano player and single-sex clientele, offers a rare glimpse of community that mainstream cinema had previously refused to document. Inside the bar, Anderson's old lover Ray hands him a drink without dialogue, their handshake lingering an extra beat. The silence screams louder than any speech. Ray's gentle, "You haven't changed, Brig," carries years of history while conforming to the code's constraints. Anderson's panicked flight afterward, shot with disorienting angles and harsh shadows, visualizes his internal turmoil. The death that follows isn't morality play. It's indictment of a system that makes honesty lethal. When fellow senators learn of Anderson's suicide, their shocked faces suggest recognition of collective complicity. Preminger's final shot of the Senate chamber, continuing business as usual, delivers a damning critique. The institution sacrifices individuals to maintain its facade of moral authority, a commentary that extends beyond politics to America's broader treatment of its queer citizens. The Haunting, 1963. Robert Wise's Gothic masterpiece cost $1.05 million and barely earned it back, but its reputation hinges on Claire Bloom's Theo, Perhaps the era's most unambiguous lesbian character. Wise dressed Theo in chic black slacks, lit her apartments with sensual red, and let her call protagonist Eleanor "my dear," in a tone audiences recognized as more than friendly. Adapted from Shirley Jackson's novel, the film follows a paranormal investigation at Hill House, where four strangers gather to document supernatural phenomena. The house's oppressive atmosphere serves as externalization of repressed desire. Its cold spots, strange noises, and architectural irregularities mirror the characters' emotional landscapes, particularly Eleanor's longing for connection and Theo's intuitive understanding of that need. Horror scholars note that the film's male gaze often aligns with Theo's, lingering on Eleanor's hands or the curvature of a hallway with sensuous appreciation. Theo's psychic abilities link queerness with heightened perception. She sees what others miss, including Eleanor's vulnerability and attraction. Their relationship develops through loaded glances, whispered conversations, and physical comfort that crosses conventional boundaries of female friendship. When the women hold hands in bed during a ghostly pounding, the camera tracks their fingers intertwining, as intimate as Psycho's shower, but allowed because it was fear. The scene plays with multiple tensions: supernatural terror and erotic possibility, protection and seduction. Theo's knowing, whose hand was I holding? The morning after creates deliberate ambiguity about whether the nighttime visitor was ghost or desire. Wise later said he fought to keep Theo's orientation even after censors urged ambiguity, betting that subtlety would hide in shadows. Ironically, it is Theo who walks out alive, while the straight heroine succumbs to the house, leaving queer viewers a rare 1960s survivor to cheer. Her final look back at Hill House suggests both escape from confinement and recognition of what lies buried within its walls, a perfect metaphor for the era's relationship to queer desire. 20 films, 20 different codes cracked. But what do they teach us? If tonight's reel taught you something new, hit like, share your favorite coded moment in the comments, and subscribe for more deep dive film history. The projection lamp may dim, but its hidden rainbow keeps shining on the silver screen.